In today's episode, we're discussing diversity in the legal industry with special guest Toya Gavin. Welcome to the Law Firm Launch Podcast.
Toya Gavin, welcome.
Yes.
Welcome to the Law Firm Launch Podcast, otherwise known as LLP.
Thanks, Jaimee.
I'm so excited to have you. I just love you so much. For our listeners, Toya and I have had the privilege of planning a Lady Lawyers Retreat together where we sought to help empower women in the legal industry to lead both fulfilling professional careers and personal lives. And the fact that it was in Jamaica has a small bearing on how successful it was. The impact that the ladies had coming out of this event because of your contributions, Toya, and I think our partnership in the event we were able to put on was just invaluable. And so I'm so grateful you're on today and that we got to partner on that.
I am grateful as well, Jaimee. It's always great to talk to you and to work with you. And I'm excited to, be on the podcast and tackle this topic.
Thank you. Well, talking about diversity, and racial equality and inequalities in our society in general, it's been a big point of discussion, obviously. And I think, us being in an industry that has not always been known as a social leader or change agent when it comes to diversity puts us in, unique positions. And I know, you've also been doing some things to try to affect change at a national level through the American Bar Association. And so I thought, what better way to approach this topic than having you, who is not just a woman in the legal industry, and you've been a female leader in the industry. You're also a woman of color, and you're also just such a powerful voice in trying to be a change agent for positive within this discussion. And so I think you just have a lot to add here. And, I'm hoping that this is just a raw and real conversation in which people can listen to your story and your experience and also your encouragement that will help them relate to you in some way or learn something new or challenge the way that they've thought about something, but then also be inspired to do some good within their law firms and within our industry to help move the conversation forward, but also just impact change. So, maybe we can start off with you just telling us about some of your interactions and or experiences through the lens of racial diversity and equality within our industry.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about being in the legal profession as a woman and as a Black woman is that, we are the agents of change. Lawyers are the agents of change for a lot of people, right? Like if you have an employment issue and you're a whistleblower and you're discriminated against by your boss, then you go to a lawyer, and the lawyer is someone who is supposed to or helps to advocate on your behalf. Mm-hmm. And we operate in this like ethical realm, right? And like how we deal with clients, and we have all these rules and regulations about how we approach things, how we deal with finances. And so there's this layer of like, we're an ethical group, but underneath that is the elitism, the classism, the racism, the sexism when you're actually in the profession. Yeah. So sometimes it's almost like your mind is trying to hold like two conflicting things at once, right? So it's this idea of advocating zealously for your clients and being the agent of change or justice for them. And then when you go back to, say, the law firm or your office or wherever you're going, you then are the victim of these issues, and you feel like you don't have a voice. And like if you say something, that you won't be supported. So I think like, just in terms of a little bit about like my story, I think most Black children, this is an assumption, but I know I went to law school because I grew up in New Jersey, and I saw a lot of the police brutality. I saw a lot of the injustice. There was a lot of huge cases of Black men who were killed throughout my lifetime, and even when I was a child, that I knew about and was aware of. And the people who fought those cases were lawyers. And so I went into this profession, or as a young child, thinking about going into this profession specifically because I wanted to be that agent of change, right? Like Thurgood Marshall was my hero, right? Like, how can we do that? And when you start to work in the profession and you have student loans and you have, all the things that come with being a lawyer, you recognize that the questions of racism are so multifaceted, that the legal side is just one piece of that, and that you can't begin to tackle the racism outside of the profession till it's really addressed within the profession. And I don't know if lawyers, I don't know how real we're willing to get in having that conversation. It's not lost on me, and on your listeners, like if you look at some of the things that have recently come out with like, different racist incidents of, the couple, I believe, that was like on their lawn with machine guns pointed at protesters, or like the different comments. A lot of those people were lawyers. There was another woman at a gas station who was yelling racial slurs at I think the woman was a Native American woman. She was a lawyer. Her husband was a lawyer. Like, we have some deep-seated anger going on that is related to, I think, racism, sexism, all these things. And we just are like, on the surface, we'll tell our clients, like, these are the talking points you need for your company. This is what you need to put in place. But like, as a whole, law firms aren't really doing anything about it.
That I am so glad you brought that up. I mean, because when you say it all out loud, there's part of my mind, it's just like flabbergasted. And the ABA actually did a study a couple years ago that showed that 50% of all Americans think lawyers only care about money and not about their clients. And 60% of all Americans think we need less lawyers in our country.
Mm-hmm.
That tells you about the sentiment that the general American population has about lawyers, even before any of these highly publicized events, right, involving lawyers.
Right.
And I'm so passionate about trying to impact change in our industry, where my experience in, our clients has been, these small, mid-sized firm lawyers are, many of them, such just salt of the earth individuals. I mean, you are one of them that just care about humanity, care about, impacting change, and care about their clients even more than they care about money, to their own financial detriment. And so it pains my heart to know all these fabulous people, and yet the industry as a whole is gaining this reputation from probably a lot of different channels. But then you see these outbursts by other lawyers with, guns on their lawn pointed at protesters, and it certainly isn't doing anything to help the reputation of our industry, is it?
Right. And I think you're right in, like, I know some of the people that Legal Back Office works with, and they're great firms and great people. And even though, I forget the percentage, but it's some high percentage in the 90s of lawyers who are either like solo, small, mid-sized firms, that's not what's promoted in our culture, right? When people think of law firms, they think of these huge, the big, law firms, the huge ones. And so I think when you are up against that, the only word that comes to mind is like marketing, right? And that this is what the profession is, this is what it's supposed to be. The people, I can't say all the people in those firms, but what's promoted in those firms is not just about like racism, but a sense of like heartlessness, like just with COVID, right? There was, I think it was Above the Law, they had this article where they had obtained like letters from law firm partners about like about what they wanted their associates to do during COVID. And it was basically like, get over it. You're lucky you have a job. So what? We're in a pandemic. And it was just kind of like,
yeah,
I don't, do you like this? No one knows what to do. Everyone's scared, but it was so like just heartless. And I remember the partner equated the pandemic to like a gravy train. Like, this is not a gravy train and a chance for you to like sit on your behind. I'm like, people aren't doing it. They're freaking out. So
yeah,
so in my head, it's like, if something like a pandemic doesn't, the collective body doesn't see empathy in that, something like racism, where, we see it, and the everyday lawyer sees it because they're on the ground representing everyday people. It's hard to kind of get that message out to the larger community when what's presented as the national face of our community are law firm partners calling COVID a gravy train. You know what I mean?
Yes. Oh my gosh, you're so right. Well, I just love like you're bringing up kind of the dichotomy of, here as lawyers, like our mandate is to serve and protect, and yet we're putting ourselves out there into the world as individuals and as a brand of lawyers as doing the polar opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And
absolutely.
that alone, that dichotomy, I think, should be something that challenges us all.
I'm sorry, I don't know where that was. That me?
Yeah, that was me.
Oh, okay.
Like, during a podcast recording, I just got a Mac, so I'm all integrated now. So now my calls come in on all of my devices, and I don't even know how to turn that feature off. It's my fault. My bad.
No, it's totally fine. It totally could have been me because I have a Mac and it does it, and I'm always like, I think I have it off, but I never know.
I got to figure that out before next time. Well, I started this podcast wanting it to be a symbol of like perfect imperfection, right? Like, how can we create something that's not this polished, fancy thing? Because we're doing this because our vision is to revolutionize the industry and positively impact the world. And if we're going to revolutionize a legal industry, like, we're not going to do that through outsourced accounting services. Am I right? Like,
right.
Revolutionizing the legal industry is a much bigger thing. And we can do that through education, through giving back, through philanthropy, and through challenging the status quo of things in the industry. And so this podcast is not about Jesus. I keep declining and they keep calling. This podcast is not about, driving a business to the legal back office. It's about how can we impact change. And so we're going to do that through raw, honest conversations that aren't overproduced. So I kind of like it when things happen that we don't expect, because that tells you I'm not sitting in some fancy recording studio with this team of people around me, making sure the technology goes all perfectly.
You know what? I think that mission and what you're talking about is so important, because one of the reasons I think that lawyers don't stand up in moments like this, even though their heart may be wanting them to, is the idea that I'm not polished or I'm not perfect enough, right? I haven't read enough books. I don't know enough information. I haven't absorbed the anti-racist library. And so therefore, I can't speak. And I think that does our profession a disservice. Like, the idea of doing something imperfectly anyway is what we need to do, right? You're never going to learn all the things, right?
Oh, I love that.
And racism in this country, this country was founded on it. So trying to unpack all that in, a couple of weeks so that you feel ready to discuss it is just not going to happen. You kind of have to, it's just like in business, you have to jump in there and be okay with making mistakes. And I know it's hard in our social media culture, where if you make a mistake, it feels like someone's going to, put a comment or whatever, but that's okay, right? You have to be willing to take that risk and be willing to say, like, it's just a comment online. I could either learn from that or not even engage in that comment, and I'm just going to keep going. Otherwise, we won't do anything, and
I
we'll be
love
in the
that.
same situation.
I love that, Toya. Like, be okay with being imperfect, but just do something, right? Like, just
Yeah,
step out and do something rather than being rendered, ineffective simply because you're not taking action at all.
yeah.
And on that note, like, when you think about, what you'd like to see law firms doing differently over the next couple of years to be a positive part of these discussions and to, affect some change, what are some things that you would like to see? What are some, I don't know, actionable things or cultural changes or things you'd like to see law firms doing differently?
One of the major things, and this is going to be very probably controversial, but I remember reading an article about some workforce situations or work. It was a gender issue in the UK, and how they ended up resolving it is that certain businesses now they're required to publish all the salaries because there was salary inequity, and they were required to publish all the salaries of. So if you were senior vice president, you knew everybody in senior vice president land was making this band of salaries. I think one of the biggest issues, right? Because changing someone's heart and mind is very difficult, but there are systemic changes that we can make that can lead people to change their heart and minds. And I think economics is a big part of that. So I would say, like, making salary, they're not going to, I shouldn't say that. I would challenge law firms to make salaries public, because then you wouldn't be paying Jim 30% more than Jane. Then you wouldn't be paying Jim, 60% more than Toya, right? You would, if it was public, you would have to answer for that. And people like doing things in the dark when they know that they're wrong. So if it was exposed, they just wouldn't do it, even if that's how they felt, right? At least systemically, there is a system in place to say, like, I really don't care how you feel, you're going to pay people on par. So that's the first thing.
I think that is actually a really great point. I mean, if we could start publishing salaries, I think that it's a great accountability tool. Man, what a huge risk. I tell people all the time that I'm a huge fan of an open book policy to a certain degree within all businesses, because I think it helps in a lot of different ways. Man, equity partners starting to produce what they're making, wouldn't that shake up the industry?
It would shake up everything. And it would shake up what's acceptable, right? What's acceptable. We all have been, particularly as women, and particularly as even as just Black women, we all have worked for people who are like, how did you get this job? How are you my boss? Right?
Oh, gosh.
And if everyone knew how much this person was making, at a certain point, even the powers that be, the people who run the company, would say, yeah, how are we paying this person this much for this amount of output? Right? Once you see the numbers, then you start to pay attention, and it's not okay. So that's one thing I would like to see. The second thing I think I would like to see is that I've spoken to a number of I do coaching, and so I've spoken to a number of people who are interested in my services during this time, and a lot of the time it's because they were on the diversity committees at their firms or in part of some organization, and they bought a set of proposals to their law firm, and it could be something as simple as issuing a statement, having anti-bias training, and all that, and were summarily dismissed or told that they were being disruptive to the workforce, and just it was very combative. And these things are, racism in America is a combative thing. It's a hard thing, and people don't want to talk about it. But if we don't resolve this issue, it's going to be to the detriment of our country. So I think just leaning into, speaking with the people of color in your firm and having an open discussion about what can we do. And some of the things are obvious. There's diversity coordinators and consultants that you can hire. There are whole positions that can have whole curriculums on how to address racism in the workplace and make a better workable environment for your firm. And so making those investments, just like you would make investments in your marketing, just like you would make investments in, you know, upgrading your software on your computer, like making that a part of something that's important to your business model. I think those are just like easy, let's say low hanging fruit that people can do very easily.
Those are fabulous, fabulous ideas. I mean,
Yeah.
because, you know, I think, you know, we can talk in like generalities or high level, like culture change from a behavioral perspective is a long process. I mean, like you were just saying, like we're not going to solve this problem in a discussion over a few weeks, right?
Right.
But I love that these are very actionable things that when you can't change behavior, like even if your firm is large and you know you've got all these people in place that have these different views, you can't always change your leadership structure or your management's feelings overnight, and especially if they attend just one training session, check the box, you're good, right?
Right.
I like those ideas as being very actionable things that you can do, that starts moving things in the right direction. And that's from an organizational perspective. And I wonder, you know, just from your experience, what best of advice would you give for the lawyer, you know, the lawyer that's in a firm experiencing inequality, you know, either as a woman or person of color or a young person that's in a position of authority that's seemingly undeserved due to age, or, you know, what are some things that you could maybe say, best advice for those individuals feeling a bit of that uneasiness, persecution, whatever that might be?
I think just in responding to your question, the answer I have is actually for the person on the other side of the equation. So the white person, the white colleague, the white supervisor. And it's in the context of a story. So I used to work at a firm, and I had this amazing, I worked for this amazing partner, a white man. He was a veteran, and he was, and I think I have like a soft place in my heart for people who are veterans because my dad's a vet. And I just tend to like people who are like, this is the job, we're doing the job, right? And I don't know how to explain that well, but that's the feeling that I've always gotten just based on my experience.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I had this one particular case where I was going back and forth to court. It was a criminal case. And basically, and I was defending a client for the firm. And I kept going in on motions, and the judge was always very hostile with me, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And it always felt, I always left with like a sense of angst. And I came out of the courtroom one day, and the prosecutor came up to me and basically said, like, perhaps it's because you're a Black woman. Like, basically told me, like, this is how this judge behaves with Black people. And then I realized that oftentimes I would be the only Black attorney there, and I would be the only one like that was just getting all this fire. And so I was trying to figure out how I was going to explain this situation to the partner, because my experience as a Black person is when you try to convey issues of racism or discrimination, people don't believe you, right? They're like, are you sure that's what happened? You know, I think you're taking it the wrong way. And what happens when people don't believe you, I think if people take it out of the racism context, if they think of something violent, like, which is, it's violent, right? Racism is violence, right? And so if I was to say someone attacked me and I explained it to you and they attacked me in the purview of me doing a job for you, and you questioned whether that happened, you would be seen as heartless. And moreover, you would be re-injuring me, because now I have to fight and deal with the repercussions of dealing with this racism and this incident and how it affects me. And then I have to also try to convince you of something that you weren't there to see. And you're questioning really whether I'm truthful, right? At the end of the day. Yeah. So what I always admired about this partner is, like, when I went in, and I remember sitting in my car for like a good 30 minutes, because this is what we do as Black people when something like this happens, because we've had these conversations over and over again. And you have to prepare yourself, because you're emotional. There's a lot of things happening. This is what people talk about. Like, I'm exhausted. It's like having to deal with the situation and having to explain it. So I'm preparing myself for all of the questions that I thought were going to come, and dealing with understanding that I'm going to have to file a motion for this judge. I'm up for a fight, and I still have to protect my client. And so I go in and I explain, like, this is what this prosecutor told me. This is what happened. And he said, before I even launched into, and I know you weren't there, but this is what really happened to me. And let me explain about discrimination. Before I even launched into that, he said to me, yeah, we're going to file that motion. I trust you. I know who you are as a person. And so if that judge was racist towards you, she's wrong and I believe you. So let's go. Like, that was it. He just believed me. And I had never had that experience ever, where someone just said, I trust your judgment. You know what it's like as a Black person, like what racism feels like. And if that's what happened to you, then let's go. And when I filed the motion, he came in and argued it for me.
Wow.
So just the optics of, he was an older white man and, going into court, and I'm a young woman, and he is like giving it to this judge. And I had never felt that. I never felt that protected by a white person, period, in my life.
Wow.
And so I would say, like, if you're in a firm as a Black person and you're a colleague of that Black person or a supervisor of that Black person, or something's going on, one, believe them when they tell you something is going on, right? It all starts with, like, do you believe they're a truthful person? If they do, then they wouldn't be telling you this if it really wasn't bothering them, because they have been thinking about this for a lot longer than it's been on your radar, right? For them to even mention it to you.
Yep.
So the first thing is, believe them when they tell you that something is going on. And then the second thing is, be an advocate because you can. You have that privilege. Like, if you see something is going on and something is wrong, don't wait for the person of color to bring it up. You bring it up, right? We're in a time now where it's like, you know what? We haven't issued a statement yet, and we have this firm, all this unrest is going on. We haven't issued a statement. Don't wait for the diversity committee to come out with a statement. Get together and say, we're going to put together a statement, because how you will be responded to in your privilege is going to be very different than how the person of color is going to be responded to. And it's also going to be a bonding thing, that people feel like, oh, okay, like, I'm safe here. I'm safe at work here. There are people I can be safe around. So that's what I would say. And then on the flip side, as a person of color, dealing with those situations, it's so hard. I think you really have to sort of protect yourself. And we always say self-care. And I think it's more about, like, figuring out, like, how I really feel in this moment. And sometimes you feel really bad. And when you do, I know we're lawyers, we work all the time, but you kind of got to take a minute. Because it's a lot, like, the feeling of, racism is essentially an idea that people of color are less than human. We are less than, right? When we come down to it. And so feeling into that space where people who you occupy the country with, the space with, your office, that at the end of the day, they don't view you as human, is very difficult to navigate the world in all the time. And caring for yourself in that is the most important thing.
I think, Toya, that's just such good advice. I'm so glad that you said, hey, here's my advice actually for the non-person of color, for the white person that's in these situations. Is like, when I originally wrote that question, of course, I was thinking about it from the other perspective. And that was such good advice for me. For me personally, but I hope, like, for our listeners too, like, don't be silent, speak up for the people that aren't speaking up, and just, like, simply believing, a person of color that's telling you their experience, and not negating it or coming up with excuses. I mean, I just think that's so powerful, and something that's easy for us to do in practice, maybe harder to do in instincts, or, like, some people are just nervous, like you said, like, it's to not act at all is, more detrimental than to act imperfectly. Especially when we have an open mind and we're open to feedback, and being able to learn together. So I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful for several of the things that you shared today in your experience, and what law firms can be doing to be more transparent, what individuals can be doing to just be taking action, even through imperfection. And then us as white people, how we can be bolstering, empowering, and supporting the Black professionals that are working with us in our, industry, I think was just really incredible. So thank you. I mean, I feel like you kind of touched on the soul, but also touched on the life, practical application. And that's awesome.
Thank you, Jaimee. Yeah, all of this is like really hard stuff. Like when people talk about doing the work, this is the work. Like the work is not, like lawyers are used to working hard on their papers, and we can stay up all night and read all the things. But the work is really dealing with the fear and the judgment that will likely come when you start doing these things and speaking up, and how you will be viewed. The work there is like sitting in those feelings and being okay with them coming, but recognizing that the humanity of someone else. And I'm always, because I'm a woman and a Black woman, but I'm like, the humanity of a Black person, the humanity of a woman is more important than my uncomfortability in the moment. And I can take this. I can take being uncomfortable.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. More importantly, thank you for your contributions today and just who you are as a light.
Thank you.
Yes, in this world, and definitely as a change agent for the positive in our industry. I wonder if you might want to tell people about your petition that you have going.
Sure. So I have a petition on change.org, which is specific to the American Bar Association and their response to the movement of our time, which is to create a more anti-racist society. And as the national face of the legal profession, I just think they need to do more in terms of training lawyers in law school. The petition has demands for how we show up as a legal community and all the things. And, they issued a statement, and I'm sure it was earnest. And, they have some Instagram posts, but that's not a systemic change, right? A systemic change is, like I said, we're going to start publishing, our salary numbers. A systemic change is forcing law schools to talk about the law and the race, make that a mandatory requirement. And so the petition is on change.org, and Jaimee, of course, has signed it. And I'm just getting as many people as I can to sign the petition so that we can build momentum to start changing the profession for the better.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And we'll include a link to that petition, Toya, whenever we put out the podcast and all the content. Because I want to encourage everyone just to engage with what you're doing and engage, all of us to engage where we're at. The point is to engage, right? So you start the conversation, to be open to learning, and to just take action to do something. So thank you again. I wish you a wonderful day and look forward to catching up again soon.
You too. Bye, Jaimee.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in today. Be sure to hit subscribe or go to legalbackoffice.com for more info.